Hey guys, welcome back to the latest episode of the Withstand podcast. Thank you so much for joining me as we continue to journey our way through the book of Leviticus and the Gospel of Luke. I really pray that this episode is a blessing to you because I know things are a little bit crazy out there at the moment, and I know that spending more and more time in the Word and just trying to sit in silence with Jesus is pretty much the best thing for my own spiritual well-being, but also my mental health. And I pray that even if you can't read the Word for yourselves today, that just listening to this episode, and apologies for my voice and my accent, but listening to this episode directly from God's Word will help get you through the day or the night or whenever you happen to be listening to this. In today's episode, we are in Leviticus and we are in chapter 11. This is God's Word. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The rock hyrax, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The hare, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. And the swine, though it divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. These you may eat of all that are in the water, whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. But all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, and the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, and the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fisher owl, and the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours, those which have jointed legs above their feet, with which to leap on the earth. These you may eat. The locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. By these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the foot, but is not cloven-hoofed, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean, and whatever goes on its paws among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the mole, the mouse, and the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is any item of wood or clothing or skin or sack, whatever item it is in which any work is done. It must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And everything on which a part of any such carcass falls shall be unclean. Whether it is an oven or cooking stove, it shall be broken down, for they are unclean, and shall be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which there is plenty of water shall be clean, but whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. And if a part of any such carcass falls on any planting seed which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put on the seed, and if a part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. And if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination, it shall not be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth, for I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animals that may be eaten and the animals that may not be eaten. This is the word of the Lord. And Tom Constable writes the following about dietary uncleanness. This catalogue of dietary regulations was unique to the Hebrews. No similar type has been found in the rest of the ancient Near East. This chapter contains a selected list of creatures that divides each type of creature into various classes of purity. According to the final verse in the chapter, the decisive question was whether a class of animals was unclean or clean. The goal of the distinctions was to determine whether an animal could be eaten. The notion of uncleanness and cleanness is specifically applied in this chapter to the question of holiness. Violating any of the regulations relating to clean and unclean animals rendered one unclean, and thus unable to enter into community worship. The purpose of the chapter is to tie the concept of holiness to God's own example of holiness. Leviticus divides the animal world into three kinds: unclean animals that cannot be eaten, clean animals that can be eaten, clean animals that can be eaten and also serve as animals for sacrifice. Chapter 11 discusses the first two categories. The last was reviewed in chapters 1 to 9. Unclean conditions were not all the same under the Old Covenant. That is, there were degrees of uncleanness. The uncleanness that certain defiling things caused required simple purification, for example, washing and waiting a short time. The uncleanness that other defiling things caused required more involved rituals. Not all uncleanness involved sin, but all sin resulted in uncleanness. The reason or reasons for the distinction between a clean and an unclean animal are still somewhat unclear. Even the identity of some of the animals is obscure. Many attempts have been made by scholars and expositors over the centuries to interpret the catalogue of abominable creatures in the book of Leviticus, but with uncertain results. Many ancient nations and religions observed lists of clean and unclean foods. These lists differed from one another, but undoubtedly they had their origin in the clean-unclean distinction that God specified at the flood. The presence of this distinction in the ancient Near East points to a common recognition of the inadvisability of eating certain foods for various reasons. This recognition shows that the fall has affected the whole creation, not just humankind. There have been at least 6 major different explanations of the rationale behind the clean and unclean distinctions in the Mosaic Law. Some of these views have very ancient pedigrees. Number 1. The distinction is arbitrary. God simply told the Israelites what to do to test their obedience. They had no idea what the reasons for these distinctions were. The problem with this approach is that it is negative, that is, it offers no explanation that human beings can understand. This is the explanation that most scholars who despair of understanding a single principle that explains all cases take. Number 2, the distinction is cultic. The reason the Israelites were to regard some animals as unclean, according to this view, was that the pagans used them in their worship and or associated them with their gods. Avoidance of these unclean animals then was a mark of the Israelites' fidelity to the Mosaic covenant. The problem with this view is that it explains very little of the evidence. The Israelites may have associated certain unclean animals with pagan cultic practices, but scholars have not been able to explain all the prohibitions on this basis alone. The distinction is hygienic. Those who hold this view believe that the unclean animals were unfit to eat because they carried diseases or were unhealthful. This view has gained popularity in recent times as many readers have become increasingly concerned about healthcare and medical science. One advocate of this view expressed it as follows: "In general, it can be said that the laws protected Israel from bad diet, dangerous vermin, and communicable diseases. Only in very recent days have better laws of health been possible with the advance of medicine. These were rule-of-thumb laws that God gave in His wisdom to a people who could not know the reason for the provision." There are good reasons, however, for believing that the Israelites did not view these provisions as merely hygienic. First, hygiene can explain only some of the distinctions. Second, there is no hint in the Old Testament that God regarded all the animals that He prescribed as dangerous to health. Third, this view fails to explain why God did not also forbid poisonous plants in addition to dangerous animals. Fourth, if these animals were dangerous to eat, why did Jesus Christ pronounce them good, that is, fit for consumption later? Number 4, the distinction is symbolical. This view sees the behavior and habits of the clean animals as illustrating how the Israelites were to behave, and the unclean animals represented sinful people. Some commentators have adopted this view, but they have applied the symbolic criterion subjectively without careful regard to the text of the whole Mosaic law. However, when one views the data in the Mosaic law comprehensively and seeks to understand the distinctions on that basis, this view seems to make sense. One advocate of this view wrote the following: "Further analysis demonstrates that each sphere of the animal realm is similarly structured. Water creatures divide into the clean and the unclean, but land and air creatures further subdivide into clean animals that may be eaten and clean animals that may be sacrificed as well as eaten. This threefold division of animals, unclean, clean, and sacrificial, parallels the divisions of mankind: the unclean, that is, those excluded from the camp of Israel; the clean, that is, the majority of ordinary Israelites; and those who offer sacrifice, that is, the priests. This tripartite division of both the animal world and the human realm is no coincidence, as is demonstrated by various laws in the Pentateuch, which apply similar principles to man and beast. Once it is admitted that the animals symbolize the human world, the uncleanness of the birds of prey becomes intelligible. They are detestable because they are eat carrion and flesh from which the blood has not been drained properly, acts that make men unclean. The problem with this view is its subjectivity. Whereas one interpreter may see symbolic significance in one thing, another interpreter may not. Unless the Bible itself identifies something as symbolic, it is up to the interpreter to decide what is symbolic and what is not. Number 5. The distinction is aesthetic, based on the animal's appearance. This view seems entirely subjective. Number 6. The distinction is ethical. This view is similar to view 4 above. Advocates believe that the animals chosen taught reverence for life. This view also seems highly subjective and is impossible to prove. Number 7. The distinction is based on normalcy. Advocates claim that God regarded imperfection or abnormality in the animal world as conditions that rendered an animal unclean. Holiness requires that individuals shall conform to the class to which they belong. This does not explain all the cases, however. For example, why did God declare sheep and goats clean, but pigs and camels unclean? It was probably not that sheep and goats are normal, but pigs and camels are abnormal. One explanation is that sheep and goats conform to the norms of behaviour that are typical of grass-eating pastoral animals, as in chewing their cud and or having cloven feet. Pigs and camels do not. One problem with this view is that it seems to run counter to the fact that God declared all animals, presumably including pigs and camels, good after he created them. Many scholars believe that a combination of the above reasons is the best explanation. That is, in some cases one explanation is correct, and in other cases another one is correct. It seems to me that the symbolical explanation is usually the best one. I believe that the Lord gave these instructions to the Israelites to teach them about holiness, and that the animals mentioned represented or symbolized certain things concerning holiness or unholiness. What did they represent? I believe the key to understanding Leviticus 11 is Genesis 3. There we read that because of the fall, God cursed the serpent and the ground. All of the unclean animals mentioned in Leviticus 11 have some symbolic connection with the serpent and or the ground. That is, they bear the characteristics of or have close contact with those cursed things. So by prohibiting those animals, the Lord was reminding the Israelites to avoid what he had cursed. Furthermore, each unclean animal has some similarity to some characteristic or characteristics of sinful human beings. Gosh, that's fascinating. Because God is holy and separate from all forms of impurity and commonality, he required that his people make distinctions that separated them from unholy things. This would account for the laws that required separation, morally, ethically, and even symbolically, from anything associated with pagan life and worship. Because God is love, he desires the best for his people in every area of their lives. This would also account for the distinctions that ruled out physically and spiritually unhealthful objects and practices, and things contrary to the purposes for which God created them. As late as New Testament times, the Jews appear to have regarded their food laws as symbolic of the division between themselves and Gentiles. The abolition of these laws under the New Covenant illustrates the fact that by his death, Jesus Christ has broken down the wall of partition that separated Jews and the Gentiles for so long. However, God has preserved these laws in the Bible so that Christians can also learn lessons concerning holiness. We have here the same threefold division of animals that inhabit the land, sea, and air as the one that appears in the story of creation. It has long been recognized that the order of the purity laws in Leviticus 11 follow that of the creation of animal life in Genesis 1. Moreover, just as in Genesis 1 God distinguished good and evil in his new creation, so also in Leviticus 11 God distinguished the clean from the unclean. In addition, Leviticus 11 to 16 has numerous parallels to the pattern of Genesis 1 to 11. Rashi, referred to within the above quotation, was a Jewish exegete who lived about AD 1040 to 1105. In AD 1040, the outstanding Jewish scholar in Christian Europe was born, Rabbi Solomon ben Isaac, familiarly known from the Hebrew initials of his name as Rashi, did more to popularize biblical and Talmudic learning than any other commentator in Jewish history. The Lord gave the following instructions to both Moses and Aaron. It was important that Aaron understood them since they had implications for the sacrifices and offerings. Moses and Aaron were to pass this information on to all the Israelites. Note that God began positively. He told the Israelites what they could eat. This section of instructions deals with the larger land animals that the Israelites could eat. They could eat any land animal that had a divided hoof and chewed the cud. Apparently, the technical definition of chewing the cud that we use today is not what the Hebrews understood by chewing the cud. Today we use this term to describe animals that do not initially chew their food thoroughly, but swallow it and later regurgitate it, and then chew it thoroughly, as cattle do. Some of the animals described in Leviticus as chewing the cud do not actually do that. For example, camels, one-humped dromedaries, rock hyraxes, and hares. However, these animals do appear to chew their food thoroughly before swallowing it. So this may be what the Israelites thought of as chewing the cud. Snakes do not chew the cud, but swallow their prey without chewing it. Next, God gave a list of land animals that were unclean because they did not both have a divided hoof and chewed the cud. camels, rock hyraxes, rabbits and pigs. Hyraxes are small herbivorous and mammals that have compact bodies and very short tails and live in arid countries. A coney in North America refers to a pika. In Britain it refers to a rabbit, but in the Bible it refers to a hyrax. Perhaps some of the animals with cloven hooves were unclean because they had only 2 digits instead of the basic 5, and were therefore thought of as abnormal. Or perhaps their cloven hooves were intended to remind the Israelites of the serpent's cloven tongue. These animals were not to be eaten, nor their carcasses touched, on penalty of uncleanness. Any dead animal was unclean, perhaps because death was not the normal condition of an animal. Death was a result of the fall, and the fall was a result of sin. So any contact with any dead should have reminded the people to avoid contact with sin. Sheep, goats, and oxen were the standard sacrificial animals of pastoralists. They have in common cloven hooves and rumination. Interpreting this theologically, one might say that as God had limited his diet to these animals, so must his people. It is a man's duty to imitate his Creator. When the Israelite restricted his food to God's chosen animals, he recalled that he owed all his spiritual privileges to divine election. As God had chosen certain animals for sacrifice, so he had chosen one nation out of all the peoples that are on the face of the earth, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. God permitted the Israelites to eat creatures that lived in the water, either seas, bodies of water, or rivers, running water, if they had fins and scales. Perhaps the Israelites could eat them because fins and scales are the normal means of propulsion and the normal skin among fishes. The basis of God's prohibition may have been that fish with fins and scales did not resemble serpents, whereas other water creatures did. As has already been observed, the means of locomotion, contrary to serpentine locomotion, and the mode of eating, contrary to serpentine feeding, were the 2 types of tests used to distinguish between clean and unclean animals. As with the prescribed land animals, the Israelites were not to eat the forbidden water animals or touch their carcasses, but to detest them. In this list of animals, God did not mention what the Israelites could eat, but went straight to the prohibitions. He prohibited 20 abhorrent varieties of birds. As with the land animals, their feeding habits seem to be the key to their uncleanness. The unclean birds ate flesh with the blood still in it, something that God also forbade among his people. Blood symbolized life, specifically fallen, sinful human life, as well as being the physical life fluid that keeps people alive. Insects are, of course, a particular subgroup of land animals. The former instructions concerning land animals dealt with the larger land animals, and these instructions deal with the smaller ones. Perhaps the fact that certain insects swarmed rather than flew in a more direct and natural way made them unclean. Their close physical connection with the cursed earth is another possibility. Locusts that hop may have been clean, since this is the normal form of locomotion for birds on land, which they resembled. Locusts also are less earthbound because of their ability to jump. The varieties of locusts that crawled specifically were unclean. Kyochi observed that sinful human beings tend to swarm together for protection from God and other people. Perhaps swarming insects were to remind the Israelites of this sinful human tendency so they would avoid it. The rest of this chapter addresses issues arising from human contact with unclean animals. Only dead animals polluted human beings. No living unclean animal did so. Death is an abnormal condition for living beings, and it causes pollution, contamination, uncleanness, defilement, infection, and disease. Death also has a direct connection with sin. In these verses, Moses passed along more specific directions concerning defilement that resulted from touching the carcasses of unclean land animals. The defiled person was to wash his clothes, and he remained unclean until the evening, until the sun went down. Walking on paws, which look like hands walking, appears unnatural to some. This may be the reason why land animals that move on paws were considered unclean. Another explanation is that these animals appear to have a very close connection with the cursed ground, more so than creatures that walk only on 2 feet. Verses 29 through 38 deal with several kinds of swarming creatures and the uncleanness they created for the Israelites. Swarming may have been regarded as an unnatural, chaotic means of locomotion, swarming through the air, crawling, slithering, scurrying on land like a serpent. The norm would have been orderly progress. Anything on which a swarming insect fell or landed became unclean. Those objects that water could cleanse could be reused, but those that water would not cleanse completely, such as an earthenware vessel, could not be reused and had to be destroyed. Or perhaps earthenware vessels were contaminated because they were made out of cursed earth. However, if one of these creatures fell or landed in a spring or cistern, an exception was made. Neither the container nor the water would become unclean. Only the person who fished the dead animal out would be unclean. God may have granted this exception because declaring water supplies and large containers unclean would have had drastic consequences in the arid regions where the Israelites lived. More probably, water was recognized symbolically as well as literally as life-giving. There was also apparently a distinction between seed for sowing, which was clean, and seed for eating, which was pronounced unclean. God gave further directions about the contaminating effects of even clean animals that died. It was apparently the person's contact with death that made him unclean. In a concluding exhortation, God called on his people to be holy because I am holy. These may be the key verses in the book. Our highest duty is to imitate our Creator by being as he is. Holiness is a general term denoting that quality in God whereby he is right in himself and in all his actions. Since only God can make a person holy, a godly life is a trophy of his grace and a tribute to his power. Teachers can take credit for instructing us, pastors for mentoring us, and friends for encouraging us, but only God gets the glory when people see Christ reproduced in us. The solemn statement, I am the Lord, occurs 46 times through Leviticus, identifying Israel's God as the ever-living, ever-present one. Every aspect of daily life was affected by the reality of the presence of God. A final summary states the purpose of these laws, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten. The Israelites could never gaze on these creatures merely with the feelings of one admiring a creating God. They were led to think of them as connecting them with a holy God. The New Testament teaches that the Old Testament food laws are no longer binding on the Christian. These laws symbolize God's choice of Israel. They served as constant reminders of God's electing grace. As he had limited his choice among the nations to Israel, so they, for their part, had to restrict their diet to certain animals. Whereas the Jews strove to express their unique status through obedience to the dietary laws, Christians must express their uniqueness through obedience to God's will, as it is revealed in the Bible. Those who have been redeemed by the holy, sovereign God must demonstrate his holiness in their everyday lifestyles, notably in eating. And I'll leave a link to these notes for you, as always, in the show notes, guys. Now, given we learned that God had some very, very specific instructions on what to eat and what not to eat for the Israelites, today's daily devotion from Charles Stanley is titled Comfort in His Direction. It's based on Psalm 32, verse 8. I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. And Dr. Stanley writes, today, here are 3 things you need to know as you wait on the Lord's direction. First, God will show you his will. He desires that you walk according to his plan and assumes responsibility for teaching you how to do so. It is, however, your responsibility to obey what he leads you to do. Second, the Father is committed to your success. From the time you were born, God has been working through the circumstances of your life to train you for his purposes. So commit yourself to following wherever the Lord leads you with confidence that he will equip and empower you to accomplish whatever he's planned for you to do. Third, God will redirect you when you make a wrong turn. So do not fear going forward when he calls. No matter how badly you mess up, the Father will take the broken pieces of your life and with the glue of his unconditional love, put it back together. He will take you where you are and help you get back on the right track with his wisdom and strength. And he prays, Jesus, thank you for teaching, leading, equipping, and even redirecting me because of your great love. Amen. Guys, thank you very much for sitting with me for the last half hour or so. I pray for each and every one of you. God bless, take care, and until next time, Maranatha.